Karen woke up every single day at 5:47 a.m. Never 5:45. Never 5:50. Exactly 5:47. The alarm clock never even had the chance to ring. Her body jolted awake moments before, as if some primal part of her never truly slept. Her bedroom remained draped in the bluish shadows of the Boston dawn, the Atlantic wind rattling the window panes, carrying the faint metallic scent of rain and concrete. She stayed still for a few seconds, staring at the white ceiling, listening to the rhythm of her own heart, steady, disciplined, relentless. But inside it was far too quiet. She rose, walking barefoot across the cold floor to pull back the curtains of her 30th floor apartment. The city emerged below like a sprawling organism, lights, cars, and invisible souls already rushing toward commitments that never ended. Karen prepared her coffee exactly as she always did. 2 level spoonfuls. Filtered water. A plain white mug. No sugar. She was never a woman of excesses. She was never a woman of comfort. She was never a woman who depended on anyone. She sat at a dining table that was far too large for just one person. Her phone vibrated incessantly. Messages from the board of directors, financial reports, spreadsheets, contracts, urgent executive decisions. She had built a fortress in the financial sector. Her name ended meetings. Her last name carried weight. But no one ever asked, "Are you okay?" Karen donned her black tailored suit, pinned her hair back with surgical precision, and left. In the elevator, the mirror reflected a woman who looked powerful and elegant, yet profoundly exhausted. Her company headquarters occupied 3 floors of a glass and steel skyscraper in downtown Boston. It was a world of cold surfaces and hushed urgency. When Karen walked down the halls, conversations died down. Respect. Fear. Admiration. Once inside her office, finally alone, she leaned her hands against the mahogany desk and breathed deeply. The silence. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of absolute solitude. The day proceeded as it always did. Difficult decisions, ruthless numbers, choices that affected the lives of thousands. Karen moved on autopilot, as if she were a ghost observing her own body. Until, in the late afternoon, the vertigo hit. At first, it was a light flutter. Then, it became a roar too loud to ignore. She gripped the edge of the desk. Her vision blurred. Her heart raced. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Karen!" Her secretary entered. "You're deathly pale." "I'm fine," she replied, forcing a sharp, practiced smile. "Just a drop in blood pressure." But she wasn't fine. That night, back in the hollow silence of her apartment, the headache intensified. The television flickered without sound. Her dinner sat untouched. Karen closed her eyes on the sofa. And for the first time in many years, she felt fear. A nameless fear. An unexplained dread. As if something invisible was about to crumble. That night, she didn't sleep. She didn't know yet that this silent discomfort was the first warning of the greatest battle of her life. Because sometimes, the body realizes long before the soul does that the world is about to change forever. Karen arrived at the hospital well before her appointment. The glass building reflected the slate-gray Boston sky, and for a fleeting moment, she had the strange sensation that her own life was made of such flawless surfaces, hiding 1,000 invisible cracks. She sat on the very edge of the chair in the waiting room. The sterile scent of disinfectant, the distant echo of footsteps, the irregular beep of a monitor in another room. Everything felt too loud, too intrusive. Without realizing it, she leaned her head against the wall and let her memory drift back. She saw herself as a young girl in a small house in rural Ohio. Her father was packing a suitcase while her mother tried to hide her tears in the kitchen. He didn't say goodbye. He just closed the door. On that day, Karen learned 2 lessons she never forgot. No one stays forever. And depending on someone is dangerous. At 18, she left for the big city alone. She worked 2 jobs, studied through the night, slept very little, and swallowed a lot of pride. When someone got too close, she retreated. When they promised love, she doubted. She built her career the way one builds a fortress. She had brief relationships. None were deep. None stayed. By her 30s, success had arrived. Awards, interviews, reverence. The name Karen Whitmore became synonymous with power and control. But no one saw the silent Sundays. No one saw the solitary meals. No one saw the cold side of the pillow. Karen Whitmore. The doctor called. She stood up, straightened her coat, and walked in. He was leafing through her exams, his face grim. Karen, the results are not simple. She crossed her hands, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. There is a progressive failure in your liver. It's a rare condition. The situation is grave. The air left the room. What does that mean? She asked, maintaining her iron posture. Without a transplant, your time is limited. The word echoed inside her like a death knell. Limited. Karen left the office without feeling the floor beneath her feet. In her car, she leaned her forehead against the glass. The city moved on, indifferent to her collapse. For the first time, her fortress was cracking. That night, at home, she opened an old drawer. Inside was a photo of her mother, smiling. Her mother had died far too young. Karen had never learned how to talk about it. Now, she had to fight for her own survival. But she didn't know how to fight with anyone by her side. She sat on the living room floor and wept. In total silence. Because some pains don't scream. They simply bleed internally. And that night, Karen realized her greatest illness wasn't just in her body. It was in the solitude she had built around her own heart. Chapter 3. The news that changes everything. The phone rang at 6:12 a.m. Karen was sitting on the edge of her bed, still wearing her clothes from the night before. She hadn't slept a wink. The Boston sky was lightening slowly, gray and cold, as if the world had also stayed awake in vigil. Hello. Her voice was a mere whisper. Ms. Whitmore, this is St. Mark's Hospital. We need you to come in today. There is something important regarding your genetic screening. Karen hung up without asking questions. The hospital felt larger that day. Whiter. More distant. The doctor was waiting for her, standing up. We found something unexpected in your family history, he said. Karen, you were adopted as an infant. The world stopped spinning. That isn't possible. Your biological records indicate a different lineage. Your mother was not your biological mother. Karen felt the ground vanish. What does this have to do with the transplant? Everything. The genetic compatibility requirements change completely. She left the hospital in a daze. Adopted. Her entire history, built on a foundation that was never truly hers. That same day, she received an anonymous email. Not everyone around you wants you to survive. Terrified, she began to investigate. She discovered that her own partner, Richard, had been embezzling funds from the company, preparing for a silent financial collapse. He was betting that with Karen's illness, control would fall into his hands. Betrayal. In the midst of this chaos, in the hospital parking lot, she dropped her files. A man bent down to help her. Here you go, he said, smiling softly. His name was Ethan. Calm eyes. A serene voice. Warm hands. Nothing about him seemed to belong to her world of sharks and skyscrapers. But when their eyes met, something different happened. Something simple. Something real. And Karen, who had always lived surrounded by power, felt, for the first time, presence. She didn't know it yet. But that man was the beginning of the miracle. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty when Karen ran into Ethan again. She hadn't planned on seeing him. She hadn't planned on anything that day. She was just walking aimlessly through the corridors when she heard his voice. You dropped this yesterday. He was holding out her medical folder. Karen hesitated before taking it. Thank you. You look exhausted. She didn't answer. The silence was her answer. Ethan pointed to a chair. "Can I sit?" Karen nodded. The distant hum of machines, footsteps, and sliding doors mingled with the silence between them. It wasn't awkward. It was a silence that breathed. "I'm also here for tests," he said. "My sister." Karen observed him. He wasn't in a rush. He wore no armor. "Sometimes the hospital changes everything," he continued. "You walk in as one person, and come out as another." Karen felt a tightening in her chest. "I don't know who I am anymore," she murmured. Ethan didn't try to fix her sentence. He just listened. In the following days, they began to meet there. Simple conversations. Nothing about business. Nothing about numbers. Just life. But as Karen began to feel less alone, the fear returned. Needing someone had always been her greatest terror. At the company, the pressure was mounting. Richard was becoming colder, more aggressive. In a tense meeting, he let it slip. "You should consider stepping down, Karen. Your health is unstable." She felt the blow. Everyone knew. That night, she called Ethan. "I can't breathe," she said. He came over. They sat on the floor of Karen's living room. The gargantuan apartment felt too small for that amount of pain. "I'm afraid of disappearing," she confessed. "And I'm even more afraid of someone seeing me disappear." Ethan took her hand. "I see you. And I'm not going anywhere." Karen cried. For the first time in many years, she cried in someone's arms. But the conflict was only beginning. The official results arrived on a rainy morning. Karen sat alone in the doctor's office when he entered with the envelope in his hands. The air felt heavy, as if the room itself knew what was about to happen. "Karen, we found a partial match donor, but the condition has progressed faster than we anticipated." She closed her eyes. "Time is short." Those 3 words weren't just sounds. They were a freefall. A cruel diagnosis. Her body was failing her. She left the hospital in a trance. Her phone vibrated non-stop. Board messages, rumors, internal news leaks. When she arrived at the company, she found an extraordinary meeting already in progress. Richard had revealed everything. The illness. The fragility. The move to strip her of control. Pure, naked betrayal. "You are no longer fit to lead," he said. Karen felt her world shatter. She left without an argument. She had no strength left to fight. That night, at home, she sat on the living room floor. The rain lashed against the windows like a merciless clock. Ethan arrived and found Karen in silence, her medical reports scattered around her like fallen leaves. "I'm losing everything," she said. "My body, my company, my life." He knelt in front of her. "You aren't losing you." She laughed, a hollow, joyless sound. "I never needed anyone, and now I need a donor just to survive." The word echoed, survival. Karen curled inward, hugging her own body as if she could hold herself together. Ethan wrapped his arms around her. "I am not leaving," he repeated. But at that moment, Karen believed that nothing could be saved. The night swallowed the city. And it swallowed Karen too. Karen spent days without leaving the apartment. The world outside continued its frantic pace, but inside those walls, everything was suspended, as if time had decided to wait for her. The curtains remained closed. Dishes piled up in the sink. The silence was so thick it felt like something you could touch. Ethan came every morning. He didn't force conversation. He didn't bring easy answers. He just sat on the sofa, sometimes reading, sometimes watching the rain through the window, as if saying without words, "I am here." One afternoon, Karen woke from a nap and found him looking at an old photograph on the shelf. "Is this your mother?" he asked. Karen nodded. "She died when I was 24. Ethan put the photo back. "She looks like someone who believed in you." The sentence hung in the air. That night, Karen opened the drawer where she kept old letters from her adoptive mother. letters she had never truly answered. She read one of them aloud, her voice cracking. "If you ever find yourself in need, don't be ashamed to ask for help." Karen closed her eyes. Something inside her shifted. The next morning, she opened the curtains. The light flooded in. It didn't change the facts, but it changed her heart. She started responding to messages. She started accepting visitors. She talked to her medical team. For the first time, she asked, "How much time do I really have?" And she began to plan, not for death, but for life. Karen spent the dawn sitting at her kitchen table, watching the city through the glass. The dim glow of the streetlights drew long shadows on the floor. Boston seemed hushed, respectful of the transformation happening within her. She picked up her phone and wrote 3 messages she never had the courage to send. One to her team, one to Richard, one to herself. The next morning, she walked into the boardroom with slow but steady steps. The board was already waiting. The air was thick with tension. They all knew about the illness. They all expected weakness. But Karen spoke with a calm that unsettled them. "I have been absent from myself for many years. I controlled everything, except my own life. That ends today." She turned to Richard. "You betrayed me. You conspired against me and tried to erase me when I was at my weakest. But a company is not built on power alone. It is built on character." He tried to defend himself, but Karen raised her hand. "No. It's over." She announced an internal investigation and her temporary leave of absence, appointing an interim board she actually trusted. For the first time in decades, she let go of the steering wheel. As she left the building, she felt fear and an overwhelming sense of relief. That night, sitting on her floor, Ethan watched her in silence. "I never chose anyone before," Karen confessed. "I always chose the work. Today, I choose to live." Ethan took her hand. "And I choose you," Karen cried. Not out of despair, but out of liberation. The following days weren't magical. They were real. Karen officially began the process on the transplant list. She joined support groups. She started cooking again. She learned how to rest without feeling guilty. She began walking in the park every morning, breathing the cold air and noticing the people who were once invisible to her. She called a distant aunt she barely knew. She asked for forgiveness from a former employee. She visited her mother's grave and said everything she had bottled up for years. Ethan remained by her side. Silent, present. Their love didn't grow on grand promises. It grew in small gestures: hot coffee, a blanket on cold nights, interlaced fingers when the fear crept back at 3 a.m. Karen didn't become perfect. She became whole. Until, on a morning with a perfectly clear sky, the phone rang. There was a donor. She fell to her knees in the living room. She wept, unable to speak a single word. The transplant lasted for hours. When Karen woke up, the first thing she saw was Ethan's face, exhausted, but wearing a smile. "You stayed," she whispered. "I promised I would." Months later, they walked through the park together, golden leaves falling around them. Karen breathed deeply, feeling the air fill her lungs. She wasn't just surviving, she was living. "I thought I had conquered everything," she said. "But only now do I understand what actually matters." Ethan kissed her forehead. "The greatest miracle wasn't the transplant, Karen. It was you finally allowing yourself to be loved." Karen smiled. There was peace. If you have made it this far, know something very important: no one wins at life alone. Sometimes, all we need is someone who stays, and the courage to accept help. If this story touched your heart, share in the comments what you felt or which part of your life you identified with. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving stories that warm the soul, strengthen the spirit, and remind us that there is always a way back to the light. And if you know someone going through a difficult time, share this video with them. Because even on the darkest days, love still finds a way to save us.